So the rear assembly, or most of the rear suspension of this RC10 B5 is complete. So I got to this step in the process. Next step is the gearbox, starting with the differential. Okay, let's turn the page here. All right, differential, gearbox, blah, 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 right? So I have a few things I want to say about this part of the assembly before I move forward. So first off, the rear inner hinge pins seem to move a lot more smoothly than the front. Okay, the front inner hinge pins so far are the only ones that are kind of tight, or I wouldn't call it tight, I would just say they're sort of firm. We'll have to see about the rear outer hinge pins, but so far these have no problem here. One criticism I have is in the rear inner toe block. Okay, so let me see if I can get this just right here. So if you look closely, maybe hard to see, there is some labeling on the toe block. This one says 3+2. Sorry, the focus isn't so good, but there are a few different rear arm mounts that you can use here. Okay, now the numbering here is not described in the manual. Typically this 3+2 means the first number is how much rear toe-in you have from this, and the second number is how much anti-squat you have. So what I find unfortunate is that in the back of the manual, where you usually have setup tips after the full assembly, there is no longer any description of what rear toe-in and rear anti-squat provide you. I actually can't remember if the B4 manual had that either, but it certainly doesn't have it in the B5 manual. And it certainly doesn't describe this here, what the ordering of the numbers means, okay? But I can tell you through my experience with the B4 that the first number is the rear toe-in, and the second number is the rear anti-squat. So this 3+2 means you're going to have 3 degrees of rear toe-in and 2 degrees of anti-squat, okay? Basically, when you have more rear toe-in, that gives you more forward traction, although if you have too much, it'll make the car difficult to rotate in tight corners. Rear anti-squat basically just takes the angle of the suspension arm and increases it relative to the ground level. Okay, so if you have if you have more anti-squat, the vertical compression of the suspension is effectively stiffer, and so that's also supposed to give you more forward traction. But it can come at the expense of lateral traction, because again, since the vertical compression is effectively stiffer, if the car is rolling to one side and the weight transfer is trying to compress the suspension, will not be able to do so quite so easily. So really, depending on the traction of the surface you have and how much you want to use the effective stiffness of the suspension to create pressure against the tire to generate grip, that's really where you're going to start playing with your anti-squat, okay? But just so you know, first number is toe-in, second number is anti-squat, okay? And what else here? The rear U-brace is kind of interesting. So this is the rear U-brace here. It looks very similar to what it looked like on the B4, but there is a critical difference in that the molded portion of the rear U-brace is largely flat with the rest of the U-brace. It's not exactly flat, but it's very close to it. And on the B4, the portion where you mounted the rear ball studs, that was elevated on the molded part of the U-brace. Okay, so what that meant was that the lowest ball stud position you could achieve on the B4 was higher up than what you could achieve here if you remove these aluminum spacers. So your roll center adjustability on this is more adjustable than on the B4. Now on the B4, a common trick that you could do is to take that rear U-brace, the portion where the ball studs mount, and to shave it down with a Dremel so that it's flat with the rest of the U-brace. I've done that on this B4 here, and what's good about this is you don't have to do that on the B5. Okay, you get a nice level surface. You don't have to worry about whether you Dremel or whether you're flattening it perfectly, and if it's all, if it's at an angle or something. So this is a nice little touch. Another nice touch, a very minor detail, but I think a nice one is that the rear shock tower has this big wide opening here that you route your wires through, and that shock tower detaches or attaches to the chassis around this opening. Okay, now on the B4 shock tower, there was a bottom brace part right here. So I'll just pull this up. Okay, so you see the B4 shock tower has this triangular piece and then a bottom brace here. So if you wanted to solder or solder wires to your motor, you gotta run them through this hole and then bring them back to your motor and solder them in. Now what this also meant was that if you wanted to take the motor out and do some work on it, it was a little bit hard because you were constrained by the amount of extra wire play that you had from this point to the motor. Okay, now what you can do on the B5 is if you want to take the motor out and say lube the bearings or check something on it, you can, if you wanted to, remove the shock tower and pull the motor all the way out so you have more sort of space to work on the motor. So that's kind of a neat little touch. It's a minor one. Most people probably won't really need to take advantage of it, but I thought it was kind of cool. So next step is the drivetrain, and I will make another video at some point later on, maybe after completely assembling the gearbox. Okay, so thanks for watching.